the high, bitter wind of winter 1890, dust curled like smoke through the town of Whetstone, rising off the frostbitten earth and spiraling between boot heels and hooves. The wooden fronts of the buildings creaked under the cold, like ribs refusing breath. At the end of the crooked street, near the post office where the nails barely held the door to the hinges, a burlap sack had burst open in the dirt. A cloud of flour, still white as snow and clinging to life, spread across the ground like spilled hope. Delilah Mae Carson knelt in it, palms white, sleeves rolled to the elbow, trying to scoop handfuls back into what remained of the sack. Her fingers were pink and raw. Her cheeks, round and wind-burnt, were streaked with flour and shame. The cold didn't bother her, it was the laughter that did. A few townsfolk watched. One spat a brown stream into the road and said nothing. Another whispered too loud, "There she is again, swallowing more than her share of the Lord's grain." Delilah didn't answer. She never did. Her dress strained at the seams. It had once been her mother's, sewn in softer years, before her brother took the fabric for punishment. It bunched at the arms, clung to her belly, and no matter how low she bent, it always pulled wrong. She tried not to hear the giggles. She tried to believe this sack of flour mattered. It didn't. But it gave her a reason to look down. Behind her, a man with boots scuffed from trail dust stepped into town like he'd been walking toward it since the war. Tall, leather-jacketed, broad in the shoulder but silent in the soul, he watched her for a long minute. No one saw him arrive. He didn't speak. He didn't stop the whispers. But his gaze stayed on her like something was being remembered or forgiven. Thatcher Reed never rushed anything. Not grief. Not love. Not even justice. From across the road, Cyrus Carson slapped his thigh and laughed until his belly shook beneath a grimy vest. He was twice the size of his sister and none of it gentle. His beard looked like it had caught fire once and only half grown back. He wore a pistol low and heavy, not for use, just for look. "Well, look at her, bless her lard-bottomed heart," he shouted. "Wrestlin' the ground like it's a biscuit she ain't got yet." The townspeople chuckled uneasily. They never laughed as loud as Cyrus did, but they never stopped him either. Shame can be heavy, but fear is heavier still. Delilah stood up slowly. She didn't wipe the flour from her skirts. She didn't say his name. Her eyes flicked to the sheriff's office. Landry wasn't there. Of course not. "You embarrassin' me again, D?" Cyrus crossed the street, smacking his hands together like he was dusting off dirt, though none of it was his own. She looked down. "Always. You know I fed you when no one would. Changed your linens. Sold my own boots when you broke the bed with your weight." That part wasn't true. But truth had never been his currency. The townspeople stiffened when Cyrus waved a piece of paper in the air. "Rit says I'm her only kin, legal and all. Can't even get her married off for chickens, and Lord knows I tried." Someone snorted. "Oh boy." He was hushed. "Tell you what." Cyrus lifted his voice and stepped onto the porch of the trading post. $5. That's what she's worth. 5 and I'll throw in her name." Delilah didn't move. Her breath fogged the cold air in small bursts. Her arms curled over her stomach like she could hide the shape of herself by sheer will. "That's enough, Cyrus." The words came low and quiet. Not a shout. Not a threat. But the street fell still. The man in the trail-dusted coat had stepped forward. He stood a few feet from Delilah, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his weathered hat. He didn't look at Cyrus. He looked only at her. "I said 5. Thatcher pulled something from his pocket. Not 5. Not 10. A coin. Gold. Shined like it hadn't seen daylight since before the war. He held it out without speaking. Cyrus hesitated. Then took it with a grin so wide it split the silence. "She's yours then," he said with a chuckle. "But don't come crying when she eats the pantry bare." Delilah flinched. Still she didn't speak. Thatcher didn't touch her. He walked past. She followed, slow and limp from cold and shame, and when she tripped on her hem, he stopped without turning and said softly, "Hold on." She caught up. Behind them, Cyrus cackled until the sound faded into the wind. The walk was long. Snow drifted along the edges of the trail like lost sheets of paper, piling against fence posts and curling around boot tracks. Delilah's breath came in quick, white puffs, and her legs ached from the uphill grade. Still she didn't ask to rest. They stopped by the rail yard to water his horse. He tied it gently, fed it a half apple, and turned to her. "You warm enough?" She blinked. No one had asked her that before. "I'm fine," she murmured. He nodded. "You'll sleep in the back room. My daughters are small. They won't mind." Her brow creased. "Daughters?" He didn't answer, just led the horse forward again. When they reached the ranch, dusk had begun to swallow the hills. The cabin was long and low, built by tired hands and kept up by ones who remembered love. A sagging porch cradled a rocking chair beside a pail of melted snow. Smoke curled from the chimney, pine sweet and slow burning. She smelled cornbread. She hadn't eaten all day. Inside, the warmth made her dizzy. A stove crackled near the far wall, and two little girls peeked from behind a hanging sheet. One had golden braids. The other clutched a rag doll by the ankle. Thatcher knelt beside them. "This is Miss Carson. She'll stay with us a while." Delilah looked at the floor. "You don't gotta call me miss." "All right then," he said gently. "What should I call you?" She swallowed. "Delilah. Folks call me Dee." He stood. "You got a bed here now, Delilah? That all right with you?" She couldn't speak. The bed was soft. She sat on it with both hands folded in her lap, like a prisoner in a church pew. No one locked the door. No one brought rope. There was a pitcher of warm water beside the wash basin. A folded rag rested on top like a blessing. She pressed her face into it and wept without sound. She dreamed of flour and laughter and boots crunching frost. When morning came, she found bread on a plate beside a jar of peach jam. A note was scratched in careful script beneath it. "Eat as much as you like. What's mine you earned." She stared at the words for a long time. She didn't touch the bread until she had washed her hands twice. Later that day, while sweeping the porch, she heard Martha Kemp's voice from the fence line. "I see Cyrus's sister found herself a meal ticket," she said, loud enough to carry. Delilah didn't respond. Martha kept going. "Heard he paid gold for her. Must be something I don't see. Or maybe he's just got a heart for strays." The broom paused in Delilah's hands. "I didn't ask to be bought," she said softly. "Well," Martha chuckled. "No one does. But we all get sold one way or another." She turned and left before Delilah could answer. That night, the little girl with the braids crawled into her lap and laid her head on Delilah's belly. "You feel soft," she murmured. Delilah froze. "I miss Mama," the child whispered. Delilah smoothed the girl's hair back. Her hands trembled. "I miss mine too." Thatcher stood in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He just watched like the moment mattered more than the noise. Later, as the wind picked up, Delilah went out to gather the linens. The youngest girl had forgotten her small dress on the line. It was stiff with frost. Delilah pressed it to her chest, stared out into the dark. The moon looked sharp enough to cut through glass. Inside the house, Thatcher was fixing the rocking chair's leg with a pocket knife and a piece of twine. He didn't look up when she entered, but his voice was quiet and sure. "You did all right today." She stood by the door. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know quiet. I know what it sounds like when someone's holding in too much." She bit her lip. "I won't ask nothing of you, Delilah." "Not one thing," he said. "But if you're staying, make yourself warm. Ain't no need to earn what's already been paid." She nodded once, tightly. Her eyes stung. As she stepped toward the back room, she whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear, "He used to say I ate more than I prayed." Thatcher's hands stilled. "That mean you prayed more than he thought?" he said gently. "Or that he never listened?" She didn't answer. But she slept sounder that night than she had in years. When dawn came again, she found something on the chair outside her room. A folded apron. Made, stitched wide in the waist. Sewn by someone who paid attention. Delilah touched the seams like they were a secret. Outside, the town was still cold. Still cruel. Still full of voices that weighed her in laughter and whispered numbers behind her back. But now, someone had given her a place where she wasn't measured. And tomorrow she'd wear that apron. Delilah wore the apron the next morning, though her hands shook as she tied it. The seams were neat but humble, stitched by fingers that knew utility, not vanity. It wrapped around her wide waist without pinching, and for the first time in her life she didn't feel like she was borrowing space. Fit. She didn't know what that meant yet. But she felt it. Outside, the air was sharp, and the snow had turned to crusted slush. The kind that crackled beneath boots and clung to wagon wheels like regret. She stood on the porch for a long time, arms folded, unsure where to begin. The broom leaned beside the door like it remembered her from yesterday. A bucket of feed waited near the barn. But no one had told her to do anything. The quiet was too loud. So she picked up the broom out of habit more than hope, and began to sweep the porch again, though there was hardly anything to sweep. As she did, the two girls peeked from behind the curtain. The older one, Willow, she thought, whispered something and giggled. The younger, Elsie, stared with wide eyes, her thumb tucked in her mouth. Delilah gave a soft wave. The girls ducked away. But the curtain stirred again moments later, as if bravery came in small doses. By the time the sun climbed over the ridge, she'd finished the porch and moved to the side yard. The snow was shallow there, thinned by the heat of animals and the tracks of little boots. She found a clothesline, limp and sagging under the weight of half-frozen shirts and stockings. She lifted a wool undershirt and began wringing the ice from it. The door creaked open behind her. "You ain't gotta do that." Thatcher's voice was low, not harsh, like a man asking, not ordering. Delilah didn't turn around. "If I don't work, I feel like a ghost." He didn't answer right away. Then, "The ghost of what?" She squeezed the shirt once more. "Of who I used to be. Or maybe who they said I was." He took a step closer, boots crunching. "You don't owe me anything, Delilah. I didn't bring you here to work." She turned finally. Her cheeks were pink from cold, her eyes darker than yesterday. "Then why did you?" He looked at her for a long time. "I don't know," he said. "But I don't regret it." There was no romance in it. No softness, no smile. Just the kind of truth that sat heavy and warm in the chest like soup in winter. And she nodded. Inside, the cabin smelled like coffee and something sweet. A pie maybe. Or memory. Delilah stepped softly, careful not to touch anything. But Elsie toddled up with her rag doll and pressed it into Delilah's hand. "She's cold," the girl whispered. "Hold her, please." Delilah cradled the doll like it was made of porcelain. "What's her name?" Elsie looked confused. "She don't got one. She's just mine." Delilah nodded. Sometimes mine didn't have names either. Willow, the older one, appeared with a folded paper. She handed it over with pride. "I drawed you." Delilah unfolded it. There was a wide-bodied figure with yellow hair and a smile too big for the face. The dress was pink and neat. The hands were holding bread. Delilah blinked. "You made me skinny." Willow shrugged. "That's how I saw you." She didn't know how to respond. But something inside her trembled, not from hurt but from something much stranger. Gratitude. That night, after the girls had been tucked in, Delilah sat near the hearth, a quilt over her knees. She watched as Thatcher mended a broken fence rail with slow, careful movements. He sat cross-legged on the floor, a hammer resting beside him, wood shavings curled like paper ribbons on the floor. She found herself asking, "Where's their mother?" He didn't look up. Buried under the cottonwood. Delilah looked toward the window. Moonlight spilled silver across the hills. "Do they remember her?" "Willow does. Elsie was too young." He paused. "I tell them stories. But I don't lie." She nodded. "That's kind. It's survival." They sat in silence for a while. Delilah reached down and touched a small tin box beside her chair. She opened it gently. Inside was a spool of red thread, some bone buttons, and a tiny square of blue fabric. She rubbed the cloth between her fingers. "My mama had a box like this," she murmured. "She used to say, a woman's not made by what she has, but by what she can fix." Thatcher looked up. "Did you fix much?" "Not really," she said. "I mostly broke things." Or that's what Cyrus said. His jaw tightened. But again he said nothing. That was his way. Later that night, she crept to the small mirror nailed above the wash basin. It was cracked through the center. Spider-veined like it had seen too many faces that didn't want to look back. She stared at her own reflection for a long time. The flour smudge was gone. The bruise on her arm had faded to yellow. But her eyes, those still carried weight. She lifted the apron slightly, touching her hip. There were no chains. No gag. Just fabric and flesh. Then she tilted the mirror to face the wall. The next day, she woke to the sound of boots on the porch and a low whistle. She peeked out the window. A man in a brown coat leaned against a post, smoking. "Cyrus." Her heart leapt to her throat. She ran to the kitchen, but Thatcher was already there, lacing his gloves. "You knew he was coming?" she asked, breathless. "I heard his boots before the rooster," he replied. Cyrus stepped inside without knocking. His grin was grease and vinegar. "Well now," he drawled, "she cleans up all right." Delilah stepped behind the stove. Thatcher stood between them. "Why are you here?" Cyrus held up a slip of paper. "Sheriff says she's still my kin. You paid me for feet, not flesh." "She ain't flesh for sale," Thatcher said quietly. "Well, I'll be taking her back. I got mouths to feed." "You don't have children." "I got livestock." "Same thing." Delilah stepped forward, voice shaking. "You sold me." "Don't mean you're free." Thatcher took one step closer to Cyrus. "She's free now." The silence in the room felt holy. Cyrus spat on the floor. "We'll see what Landry says." He turned and left. Thatcher didn't look at her. He just pulled the door shut. The girls stayed quiet all morning. They sensed something had shifted. That night, Delilah went out to the barn to be alone. She sat beside the calf she'd fed earlier, stroking its fur. "I don't belong nowhere," she whispered. "Even when I'm quiet, I'm too much." From behind her, the barn door creaked. "You belonged here before you knew what the word meant," Thatcher said. She wiped her cheek. "I don't know how to stay somewhere that doesn't hurt." "Then learn slow," he said. "No one's rushing you." She turned to face him. He held something in his hand. A folded bundle. She took it. Inside was a shawl. Soft, thick, with tiny flowers stitched into the hem. "My wife wore it when she needed strength." Delilah clutched it to her chest. "I don't know if I can be what you want," she said. He shook his head. "I want nothing. But I'll offer peace." She nodded. In the stillness, the calf nuzzled her hand. When she returned to the cabin, Elsie had left a cup of milk on her bed. Beside it, a note written in shaky letters. "You smell like warm bread." Delilah smiled for the first time in years. And far off, down in the town, Cyrus was whispering to Sheriff Landry. But Delilah was no longer listening to men who whispered. She had started hearing her own voice again. The thaw came early that year, sneaking in with the first rains of March like a guest no one invited but everyone needed. The snow that once blanketed the hills now shrank into muddy creeks, and the brittle wind softened into something nearly kind. Yet for all the mercy in the weather, Whetstone's people remained frozen in their ways. Delilah stepped into town wearing a clean, chestnut-colored dress stitched by her own hand. The shawl around her shoulders had belonged to a woman loved and buried, and though it wasn't hers by blood, it rested on her with a quiet grace. Her apron, still patched and broad, held a loaf of cornbread she was bringing to the miller's widow, who'd recently buried her son. The streets weren't loud. They never were. But silence could be sharper than gossip, especially when laced with glances. As she passed the general store, a group of women turned their backs almost in unison. One of them, Ruthie Tanner, muttered just loud enough, "Some folks think wearing another woman's shawl makes them fit in." Delilah didn't stop walking. Her fingers tightened on the basket handle, but her shoulders didn't fold. She had spent too many years shrinking for others' comfort. At the seamstress's window, little mouths pressed to glass. A girl no older than 6 pointed. Her mother yanked her away. By the time Delilah reached the widow's porch, her cheeks burned not from sunlight but from something deeper, something older. She knocked gently, left the basket, and walked back the long way, skirting the schoolhouse and ducking her chin to avoid the sting of children's laughter. Back at the ranch, she found Willow crouched beside the pump, her dress soaked to the knees. "I wanted to fill the trough before Papa got home," she said, wringing her hands. Delilah knelt beside her. "You don't have to work for love, baby." Willow blinked up. "Then why do you?" The words landed soft, but they stayed heavy. That night, as they ate stew and watched the fire cast shadows across the log walls, Delilah asked, "You ever get tired of what they say about me?" Thatcher didn't look up from his bowl. "Don't pay attention to echoes." "They say you paid too much," she murmured. He leaned back. "Then they've forgotten what gold's worth." She looked at him across the flickering light. "You never ask me anything." "Why?" "I wait for truth to speak itself." Delilah stood, walked to the wash basin, and dipped her hands in cold water. Her voice barely rose above the drip. "I used to eat in the dark. Cyrus said the light made folks lose their appetite." She didn't turn. Behind her, the silence swelled, not empty but full of something unspoken. When she did glance over her shoulder, Thatcher had set his bowl aside. He didn't speak. But he stood, walked past her, and quietly opened every curtain in the room. "Let the light come in," his gesture said. "Let them see you." The next morning he placed something on the table, a pair of boots. Not new but mended, polished with care, the laces rethreaded by hand. "For town," he said. Delilah ran her fingers over the leather. "You trying to make me respectable?" He shrugged. "You already are. Just figured your feet should know it." The boots fit just like the apron had. And like the apron, they made her nervous. She wore them the next time she came into town, this time to sell preserves from the orchard trees Thatcher had planted long ago. She set her jars on a wooden crate by the blacksmith's and waited. Some folks stopped and glanced. Most kept walking. Sheriff Landry strolled over, chewing a toothpick. "Didn't think I'd see you out here," he said. "Didn't think you'd notice," she replied. He chuckled. "They're saying Thatcher paid a gold coin for you." "That true?" She straightened. "He gave it to my brother. Not for me, for peace." Landry spat in the dirt. "Town don't like things that look like debts." especially not wrapped in dresses. Delilah looked him in the eye. Then maybe the town's too small for Grace. Landry raised a brow. You getting bold, Miss Carson? No, she said. I'm just done hiding. He tipped his hat and walked away. By noon, a few jars had sold. Not many. But one little boy ran off with a spoon of plum and smiled like he'd swallowed the sun. Delilah was gathering her things when she heard it. Didn't take long for the heifer to learn how to sell, Cyrus's voice called out across the street. He stood with one hand on the saloon's porch post, whiskey already staining his shirt. You think 'cause you're in boots and lace that you're different now? He said. You're still the girl that broke chairs and stole pies. Ain't no coin big enough to turn you into a wife. Delilah stood tall. No one bought me to marry. No, but you're warming a widower's bed, ain't ya? Them girls call you my yet. People stared. They always stared. Across the road, Martha Kemp shook her head and turned her face away. Delilah felt her throat tighten. But she didn't speak. She only bent, picked up the crate and walked on. That evening, when Thatcher rode in from the northern fence line, he found her sitting on the porch steps, the boots unlaced beside her, her feet bare and pink from the cold. I heard, he said quietly. She nodded. He knelt beside her, not close, not crowding. Just near enough for warmth. I ain't ashamed of being fat, she said. He waited. I'm ashamed that I still think I need to earn my right to be seen. He looked out at the fields. I got scars. Ain't ashamed of the pain that made 'em. Just ashamed I let folks talk like they weren't there. She turned toward him. Do your girls know? They know I get quiet sometimes. That's enough. She smiled, faint and full of grief. I used to be loud. As a child. Couldn't sit still. Mama said I had a song in my bones. What happened to the song? I let someone tell me it was noise. He didn't respond. He stood, walked inside and returned with something wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it. A small notebook. Inside were blank pages, stitched at the spine with twine. You start remembering the song, he said. Write it down if you can't sing it. That night, she held the book to her chest while the wind clawed at the windows. The next morning, Delilah rose early. She tied on her apron, laced her boots, and braided her hair into 2 thick ropes. She brought a fresh pie to the widow she'd visited before. When the woman opened the door, her eyes went wide. You come again? She asked. I didn't leave the first time, Delilah said. They shared the pie on chipped plates, sitting across from each other like women do when one has cried recently and the other understands what silence means. You're not like what they say, the widow whispered. No one is, Delilah replied. On her way back through town, she passed Cyrus again. He didn't speak this time, just spat in the dirt and turned his back. Martha Kemp, watching from the mercantile window, didn't look away fast enough. Delilah caught her eye. This time Delilah smiled. Back at the ranch, the girls were playing in the dirt. Elsie held up a dandelion with pride. It's yellow like the sun, she said. Willow added, You look pretty in yellow. Delilah looked down at her brown dress, speckled with flour from baking. Maybe someday I'll wear it, she said. That night, as the sky turned red behind the hills, Thatcher brought in a package wrapped in brown paper. I passed through town, he said. Stopped at the seamstress's. Delilah opened it slowly. Inside was a bolt of yellow calico. Bright as wildflowers. Soft as fresh linen. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she touched it with reverence and whispered, I think I remember the song now. He said nothing. But his eyes didn't turn away. And from down the trail, a rider approached, dust rising behind him like a warning. Sheriff Landry. The first true storm came the night the cow went into labor. A slow rain had been teasing the roof all afternoon, a whisper of what was coming. But by dusk, the clouds sank heavy across the fields like dark wool stretched too tight. Thunder rolled low through the valley, and lightning stitched brief veins of light across the hills. Inside the house, Thatcher was gone. He'd taken the wagon east to help a neighbor mend a collapsed bridge. He wouldn't return until morning. Delilah stirred the stew slowly, watching the broth darken with root and marrow. The girls were curled on the rug beside the stove, drawing crooked suns and lopsided cows in the soot of the hearth. The warmth felt fragile against the rising wind. Then the lowing started, deep, guttural, and wrong. She turned to the window. The barn stood against the storm like a ship bracing for sea. Again came the cry, raw and pained. Delilah set the ladle down, pulled her shawl around her shoulders. She looked at the girls. I'll be right back, she said softly. Willow sat up. The cow's herding. I know. Wait for Papa. Delilah's voice stayed even. She might not have time. She lit the lantern by the door. The flame wavered once, then held steady. Outside, the wind slapped the trees like it wanted them to leave. Mud pulled at her boots and rain needled through the shawl like it wasn't even there. But she didn't stop. She crossed the yard in quick, sinking steps and threw the barn doors open with her shoulder. Inside it smelled of hay and fear. The cow lay on her side, flanks quivering, eyes wide. A birth half done. The calf's hooves showed, slick and unmoving. Delilah dropped to her knees beside the animal. She whispered, not words, just sound, steady, calm. Her hands shook, but she stripped off her shawl, rolled up her sleeves and reached forward. She'd watched her mother deliver 2 calves once. That memory lived somewhere in her fingers now, rising like a hymn in crisis. The rain hammered the roof above as if trying to warn her. But she stayed. She worked by the flicker of the lantern, her dress soaked through, her breath tight in her throat. The calf was twisted, shoulder lodged. She gritted her teeth and pushed her hand deeper. Time stilled. Only sound, her heartbeat, the cow's low moan, the thrum of rain and pain. Then a shift. A give. She pulled slowly, guiding the hooves free, turning the angle with trembling fingers. The calf spilled out in a wet tangle, unmoving. Delilah wiped its nose, cleared the mouth, rubbed hard along the ribs. Come on. Come on. She blew into its nostrils. Breathe, little one, she whispered. You don't get to quit. Then a cough. A jerk. A bleat, small and hoarse. She laughed through her tears, sank back in the straw and let herself shake. The cow raised her head, lowed softly. The calf struggled to its knees. Delilah rested her head against the wooden beam behind her and closed her eyes. Her arms were bloodied to the elbow, her palms raw, her hair matted against her cheeks. But her chest rose with something fuller than breath. She'd done it. Not for show. Not for praise. Just because it needed doing. A half hour passed before she moved again. She cleaned the calf with rags and rubbed warmth into its limbs. When she stood, her knees gave slightly. She grabbed the rail to steady herself. Her hands throbbed, but she managed to shut the barn doors and trudged through the slush back to the house. The girls stood waiting by the window, their faces pale and pressed to the fogged glass. When she stepped inside, they gasped. You're bleeding. Delilah shook her head. It's not mine. She peeled off the wet shawl and apron and knelt beside them. The calf is alive, she said. Elsie reached out a tiny hand and touched Delilah's cheek. Are you a doctor? Delilah smiled. No, sweetheart. Just a woman who's been through things. She stood slowly. Now go to bed. I need to warm up. The girls scrambled into the bedroom. Alone, Delilah washed in the basin, red water swirling down the drain like ink. She watched her reflection ripple in the mirror's cracked glass, the lantern light playing tricks on her face. For the first time she didn't flinch. Her arms were strong. Her eyes clear. She wrapped herself in a dry blanket and settled into the rocker by the stove, drifting between sleep and thought. When dawn cracked open the night, a wagon rolled up the road. Thatcher stepped down, his coat streaked with mud. You all right? He asked, eyes scanning her face. She nodded. Everyone's fine. He walked to the barn. When he returned, he said nothing. Just walked inside and placed a wrapped bundle beside her on the table. She opened it. Brett. Still warm. You earned it, he said. You saved it. He didn't mean the calf. The girls came rushing in, babbling the story. Papa, she pulled the calf out with her hands. She was so brave, like a soldier. She didn't even scream. Thatcher listened, arms crossed. He looked at Delilah. You didn't wait for help. She met his gaze. Sometimes help takes too long. He nodded once, slow. Later that day he repaired the barn roof while Delilah sat with the calf, who now wobbled on its legs like a drunk preacher. She hummed to it, brushing its soft hide, and realized she wasn't afraid of her voice anymore. That night, she laid the shawl over the foot of her bed, smoothed the fabric and stared out the window. Cyrus had once told her, you bleed too easy to survive out here. But she had bled, and she was still standing. In the morning she woke to the sound of hoofbeats, many of them. From the front porch she saw them. Sheriff Landry. And Cyrus. Not alone this time. The hooves stirred up dust that hadn't settled since the last freeze. 6 riders moved up the long path toward the ranch, their outlines sharp against the gray sky. Sheriff Landry led them, his face stiff beneath the brim of his tan hat. Behind him rode Cyrus Carson, his gut bouncing with each trot, eyes smug, chin tilted like he was already halfway to victory. 4 more followed, men from town with badges on their coats and rumors in their mouths. Delilah stood barefoot on the porch, the wind catching her nightdress at the hem. Her hair was loose, thick with sleep, but her shoulders held still. Thatcher stepped out beside her, his rifle in one hand, not raised, just resting. He hadn't spoken yet. But Delilah felt his presence like a steadying palm between her shoulder blades. The riders slowed as they neared the gate. The cow lowed in the barn. Wind moved through the apple trees like something remembering how to sing. Sheriff Landry dismounted first, his boots crunching in the dirt. "Morning, Reed." Thatcher nodded once. "Sheriff." "We've come on account of a petition," Landry said, glancing toward Cyrus. "Claims Miss Carson was unlawfully acquired and remains under illegal custody." Delilah blinked. "Custody?" she repeated. Cyrus slid off his horse with a grunt, brushing mud off his vest. "You was never free, girl. That gold coin? That was for a favor, not ownership. I still got blood claim on you." "You sold me," Delilah said, her voice steady. "In front of God and every eye in Whetstone." Cyrus laughed. "You think that matters? I got a writ signed by Landry himself saying I'm your rightful kin. I'm here to bring you home." "This is her home," Thatcher said quietly. "She bled for it." Landry cleared his throat. "Now let's be reasonable. Cyrus here has paperwork. You've got sentiment." Delilah stepped off the porch barefoot, walking slowly across the cold earth until she stood between the two men. She looked at Cyrus, really looked. His face was red with the effort of pretending he still had power. His lips curled in victory, but his eyes twitched every time hers didn't lower. "I ain't going anywhere with you," she said. "You don't get a say. I didn't once. When Mama died, I didn't get to grieve. When you sold the farm, I didn't get to argue. When you called me fat, I laughed so you wouldn't hit me." She took a breath. The world was still. "But I buried a calf alive in my hands this week. I calmed a girl with nightmares. I kept your name quiet even when folks begged for gossip." She reached into her apron and pulled out something folded. A scrap of paper. She handed it to Landry. "What's this?" he asked. "My name. I wrote it myself. You said he had a writ? Well, so do I. It ain't signed by no judge, but it's mine. And it says I belong to no one." Landry looked at the paper, then back at her. "That don't hold in court." "No," she said. "But neither does a soul." Cyrus stepped forward. "You think you're too good for your own blood?" "I think I was worth more than $5, she said. Behind her, Willow and Elsie stood in the doorway, one clutching the other's hand. The younger one wore the yellow calico dress Delilah had stitched in secret. The older one called out, clear and bright, "She's our mama now." The men shifted. Landry exhaled slowly. "Well, I'll be damned." Thatcher spoke then, calm but low, like a distant storm making its case to the earth. "You want to drag a woman off this land in front of 2 children, Sheriff? You want to tell the town you arrested someone for surviving?" He stepped forward. Not fast. Not threatening. But the silence that followed was full of his weight. "I gave you gold because I wanted peace. Not because I thought I could buy her." He looked at Delilah. "I've got nothing left to give her but room and time and truth. If that ain't enough, then she's free to leave." Delilah turned. She hadn't known what he felt. He never said much. But something passed between them then, quiet and solid as a hand reached under water. Cyrus scoffed. "You can have her, then. Hope you like waking up next to thunder." Delilah smiled. "Better than waking up next to a man who smells like rot." Cyrus's hand twitched near his coat. But he didn't draw. Landry stepped between them. "That's enough," he said. "She's not property. She's not a case. And far as I can tell, she's not going anywhere." Cyrus sputtered. "But the law." "The law ain't got a place for this," Landry said, turning to mount his horse. "Which means it's yours to live with, or yours to walk away from." The riders turned. Cyrus stood alone in the mud, rain beginning to spit from the sky again. He looked at Delilah one last time. But this time her eyes didn't flinch, didn't drop. He spat and walked back to his horse. By the time he left the gate, he was already smaller. Thatcher exhaled. "You all right?" Delilah nodded. She walked back toward the porch, barefoot still, the wet ground clinging to her soles. Willow ran to meet her, hugging her around the middle. Elsie followed with 2 dandelions in hand. "You didn't let them take you," Willow whispered. "No," Delilah said. "I didn't." Inside the house, the fire burned warm. She peeled off her apron, hung it by the stove, and reached for the yellow fabric folded on the chair. She held it up to her chest. She hadn't worn it yet. Thatcher stood in the doorway watching. "I'd like to make supper tonight," she said. "You sure?" Yes, she said. I want to feed something that loves me back. That night they ate together. No words about the morning. No questions about what came next. Later, when the girls were asleep and the dishes washed, Delilah stepped outside. The moon hung low and full, casting silver across the porch. Thatcher followed her out, holding 2 mugs of tea. You still thinking of leaving? He asked. I stopped thinking about leaving when I realized I'd already arrived, she said. He handed her a mug. Then stay. She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. They sat in silence, shoulders close but not touching. The porch light flickered. Across the field, the calf she saved bellowed from the barn. Delilah smiled, her hand resting over her own chest like something steady had been lit inside it. They'd said she was too much to carry. But now she carried others. They'd said she was too hungry to love. But now she fed hearts that had gone without. She hadn't lost weight. But she had shed everything that wasn't hers to bear. And that was worth more than gold.